I found out my husband was a ghost, a professional one, the night I opened a briefcase I wasn't supposed to know existed. It was a Tuesday. Adam was in the shower. His phone had buzzed on the nightstand with a name I didn't recognize, and some instinct I'd been ignoring for months made me pick it up. Just a preview on the screen. 6 words. The Reyes job is ready. Confirm. I didn't know a Reyes. I didn't know what a job was. My husband was a financial consultant. Quiet, careful, boring in the reassuring way. But my hands had gone cold, and I found myself, for the first time in 9 years of marriage, walking to the closet and pulling down the locked briefcase he kept on the top shelf, and always, gently, told me not to worry about. It wasn't locked that night. He'd been careless, just once. Inside were 4 passports. 4, same photo, my husband's face, 4 different names, none of them Adam. There were bank documents for accounts I'd never seen, in countries we'd never been, and there was a folder, thick, full of what I slowly understood were other people's lives, names, financial diagrams, timelines, instructions, each one a map for how a man could die on paper, hide his money, and walk away from a woman, leaving her holding the wreckage. My husband didn't manage money. He made people disappear, for a fee, and on the very last page of that folder, paper-clipped and waiting, was a fresh diagram with a name at the top I recognized instantly, because it was mine. He wasn't just building disappearances for other men. He was building one for himself, and I was the woman he was about to leave holding the wreckage. Let me take you back. My name is Elena. 9 years ago, I married a man named Adam Sloan, and I thought I'd finally gotten the one thing my chaotic childhood had never given me, something safe. Adam was steady. That was his whole gravity. In a world of loud, risky men, he was quiet and deliberate and never raised his voice. He remembered how I took my coffee. He handled the money side so I never had to worry. I'm a school counselor. Numbers exhaust me. And he knew it. And he made it a gift. Let me carry that part, he'd say. You carry the kids all day. Let me carry this. I have since learned that this exact sentence, let me carry the money so you don't have to, is the first move in a very old game. It's how a certain kind of man builds a wall between a woman and her own life, brick by brick, disguised as love. I've heard it now from a dozen women. We all fell for the same sentence. For 9 years it worked. We had a comfortable house, a comfortable life, a marriage I described to friends as not exciting, but solid. I didn't know that solid was a performance. I didn't know my husband spent his days engineering the destruction of women, exactly like me, then came home and kissed my forehead and asked about my day. The cracks started about a year ago. A new watchfulness in him, 2 phones, calls taken in the garage, and a slow, creeping coldness, the specific chill of a man mentally packing to leave a house while still sleeping in it. I told myself it was a midlife thing, a work stress thing. Then I opened the briefcase and found my own name on the last page and understood that my quiet, safe husband had been planning, with the same cold care he gave his clients, to erase me. I did not confront him. Every cell in my body wanted to, but some deeper animal sense, the one that had kept me alive through a bad childhood, told me that a man with 4 passports and a folder full of vanished lives was not a man you confront across a kitchen table. A man like that has contingencies. A man like that has done this before. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I photographed every page in that briefcase with trembling hands, put it back exactly as I'd found it, got into bed beside him, and said goodnight to my husband as though I hadn't just seen the blueprint of my own erasure. The next morning I started asking, very carefully, whether anyone knew a lawyer who handled this kind of thing. A woman in my support group. I'd joined one, quietly, months earlier, when the loneliness of the cold marriage got to be too much, took my hand and said, "There's only one person for this. She's quiet, she's sharp, and she does not lose. But I have to warn you, Elena, she's going to look at what you found like she's seen a ghost. Because I think she's been looking for your husband for a very long time." Her name was Diane Okafor. I sat in Diane Okafor's office and laid my phone on her desk, and I watched a composed, unshakable woman come apart very quietly, one photograph at a time. She scrolled through the images of the briefcase, the passports, the accounts, the folder of ruined women, and she did not say a word for a long time. Her jaw was tight. Her hand, when she reached for her water, was not quite steady, and when she got to the last page, the diagram with my name on it, and above it, in the corner, a small handwritten mark, a symbol, a signature of sorts. She stopped scrolling entirely and closed her eyes. "Elena," she said, "I need you to tell me your husband's name again. His real one, if you know it." "Adam Sloan," I said, "though I don't think that's real either. There were 4. "No," Diane said quietly. "Adam Sloan isn't real. But I know who is." She turned her monitor toward me and pulled up a file. An old one, years old, that she clearly kept close. There was that same handwritten mark in the corner of an old document. "In certain rooms, Elena, your husband is called the architect. He doesn't cheat wives. He doesn't steal money himself. He's cleaner than that. He teaches. He sells the blueprint, how to fake the death, structure the shells, route the money, and leave the wife holding the debt and the blame. 3 of my clients were destroyed by men he trained. Probably dozens I'll never know about." She looked at me. "I have been trying to find this man for 15 years. 15 years, I repeated. Why 15? And Diane Okafor, who had never once, in all the times I'd sit across from her later, shown me the wound underneath the armor, showed it to me then. "Because he's the man who taught my husband to disappear," she said. She told me the story flatly, the way you tell a story you've told yourself 10,000 times until the edges wear smooth. 15 years ago, Diane had been a young attorney, newly married, pregnant with her first child. Her husband, Marcus, was charming and secretly drowning in debt she knew nothing about, because he handled the money, because let me carry that part. Then one day Marcus was gone. Not dead, gone. He'd emptied everything, structured it all offshore where she couldn't reach it, taken out loans in her name, and vanished so cleanly that for months the world assumed she was the one who'd done something wrong. She lost the pregnancy and the stress of it. She lost her home. She spent 2 years being treated like a suspect in her own ruin, clawing her way back with nothing but a law degree and a rage that never cooled. "It took me a long time," Diane said, "to understand that Marcus wasn't smart enough to do what was done to me. Someone taught him. Someone sold him the map. And when I finally started finding other women wrecked in the exact same pattern, the exact same fingerprint, I realized I wasn't chasing a bad husband. I was chasing the man who makes bad husbands into ghosts. I built my whole firm to find him." She looked at the photo of my husband on my phone. For 15 years he was a shadow, a method, a mark in the corner of a page, and you just walked into my office and put his face on my desk. He's not a shadow anymore, Elena. He's a man, your husband. And for the first time I have a way in, because for the first time, the architect made the one mistake he's spent his whole life teaching other men not to make. "What mistake?" I asked. Diane almost smiled. "He married a woman he thought was nobody, and he left his briefcase unlocked. Here was the problem, though, and Diane laid it out with brutal clarity. We couldn't just hand the photos to the authorities. The architect had spent his life being clean. His name was on nothing. The passports could be explained away, lost, destroyed. The folder of ruined women was damning but circumstantial. He'd never touched their money himself. He only advised. He'd built a life with no fingerprints, which is exactly what made him the best in the world at building them for other men. If we move loud, he vanishes, Diane said. He is the single best person alive at disappearing. He has 4 passports and 15 years of practice. The moment he senses a net, he'll be gone, and he'll do to you on his way out exactly what's on that last page. Leave you the debt, the blame, the wreckage. We'd be handing him a reason to execute the plan early. So what do we do? I asked. We do the only thing that's ever worked against men like this, Diane said. The thing I've spent 15 years learning. We don't fight him loud. We fight him quiet. We use his own method against him. And Elena, she paused. We don't do it alone. Because it turns out I'm not the only woman who's spent years wanting to be in the room when this man finally falls. She picked up her phone, and she made some calls. They came within the week. I didn't understand, at first, who these women were, or why Diane had summoned them, but I understand now that I was watching something rare, the assembling of everyone the architect's work had ever broken, in one room, no longer broken. There was Nora, who spoke first, calm, precise, a woman who'd beaten a husband and his hidden fortune in a courtroom with a single sealed envelope. "The key," she said, "is patience and paper. Men like this talk themselves off a cliff. We just have to be there with a court reporter when he does. I've done it before." There was Rachel, sharp and warm, who'd had her own company stolen, and had won it back because she understood one thing nobody else in her boardroom did: that ownership is a legal fact, not a feeling. "He hides money in structures," she said, studying the briefcase photos. "But structures have to be owned by someone. Even his. Let's find out who legally owns the ghost. There's always a seam." There was Vivian, quiet and steel-spined, who'd taken control of an entire family fortune from beneath the people who tried to evict her. "He's moving money offshore for himself now," she said, tapping the diagram with my name on it. "Which means he's about to be a man with a lot of hidden assets, and a plan to be legally gone. I know exactly what that looks like from the inside. I know how to freeze it." And there was Grace, a hospice nurse who had buried an empty casket and then watched her supposedly dead husband pour champagne at a wedding. She looked at the briefcase, at the 4 passports, at the whole architecture of faked death, and she said the thing that changed everything. "I know this scheme better than anyone in this room," Grace said quietly, "because my husband used it on me. And I beat it with one fact. Your husband apparently forgot he taught everyone else." She looked at me. "A dead man owns nothing, Elena. The second these men declare themselves gone to escape, they can't touch the fortune they hid. They trap themselves. Your husband has spent 15 years selling other men a cage and calling it a door." She almost smiled. "Let's let him walk into his own." I looked around that room at 4 women the world had tried to erase, and one lawyer who'd spent 15 years turning her ruin into a weapon, and for the first time since I opened that briefcase, I was not afraid. "Here is what we did. I'll keep it simple, because the beauty of it was that it was simple. We didn't chase the architect. We let him keep believing he was the smartest person in every room, because that belief was the only lock we needed to pick. Vivian and Rachel, working with Diane, traced the ownership of his hidden structures, and found, as Rachel promised, the seam. To keep his own money invisible even from his own clients, the architect had built his personal fortune inside a structure that, on paper, in one crucial jurisdiction, listed a spouse as a legal co-holder. A formality, a piece of camouflage he'd set up years ago and never imagined would matter, because he'd married a school counselor who didn't do numbers. He'd made me a legal co-owner of his ghost, and then forgotten I was a person. I wasn't nobody. I was, it turned out, the one signature that could freeze everything he'd spent 15 years hiding. We prepared it all in silence. Nora built the evidentiary file the way she'd built her own. Patient, airtight, every page in order. And then Diane did the one thing guaranteed to make the architect do what we needed. She let him catch a whisper of a net. A single quiet inquiry, in a room she knew he'd hear about. Just enough to make the best disappearing artist alive reach for his own exit. I want you to understand what those weeks cost me, because it's the part no one sees. Every night I went home and slept beside the man who had my erasure diagrammed in a briefcase upstairs. I made his dinner. I asked about his day. I kissed him goodnight and lay in the dark listening to him breathe. This stranger, this architect, this man who had built his fortune teaching other men to do to their wives exactly what he was preparing to do to me, and I had to be, every second, the same trusting, oblivious Elena he'd married, the Elena who didn't do numbers, the Elena who was nobody. One flicker of the wrong expression, one careless word, and a man with 4 passports would be gone before dawn, and I'd wake up to a frozen life and my own name on a stack of debts. Twice I nearly broke. Once he caught me staring at him across the breakfast table and asked, lightly, "Everything okay?" And I felt the whole thing balance on a knife's edge, and I heard Diane's voice in my head, steady as a heartbeat, "Fight quiet." I smiled and said I was just tired, and poured his coffee, and my hands did not shake, and he went back to his newspaper. That was the closest I have ever come to running for my life while sitting perfectly still. He did exactly what he'd taught 100 men to do. He moved to vanish. And every door he reached for, we already owned. He came home on a Thursday to execute the plan. The same plan on the last page of that briefcase, the one with my name on it. Calm, careful, certain. He'd transferred what he thought he could, prepared his exit, and come home to set the final pieces of my erasure in motion, probably to leave me some tender note and a mountain of debt. He found me sitting at the kitchen table, and he found Diane Okafor sitting beside me. I watched my husband's face do something I'd never seen it do in 9 years. I watched it register a stranger in his kitchen and understand, in a single second, that the stranger was not a stranger to him at all, that after 15 years, the woman who'd been hunting his shadow was sitting at his own table, and that meant the shadow was gone, and all that was left was a cornered man. "The accounts are frozen," I told him. My voice didn't shake, which surprised even me. "All of them. Turns out you made me a co-owner years ago, a little piece of camouflage. You always told me not to worry about the money, Adam, so I didn't, until I did." I slid a single page across the table, his own diagram, the one with my name on it. "You taught men how to disappear and leave their wives with nothing, and then you got sloppy and lazy, and you left your briefcase unlocked because you were so sure I was nobody." For a moment, the mask didn't crack. He was too good for that. He tried the old gravity, the steady voice, the, "Let me explain. Elena, it's not what it looks like." He reached for my hand across the table the way he had 1,000 times, the practiced tenderness that had fooled me for 9 years. And I looked at that hand, the hand that had drawn the diagram of my ruin, and I did not take it. I just moved mine away. And I watched something in him understand, finally, that the performance was over, that there was no version of the steady, reasonable Adam that was going to walk him out of this kitchen, because the woman across the table had already stopped being his audience. He looked at Diane. "And you," he said softly, "after all this time." After all this time, Diane agreed. She didn't gloat. She'd waited 15 years and she didn't need to. "You can't run, Nathan. A frozen ghost has nowhere to go. The moment you try to prove you're anyone at all, to reach a single account, you walk straight into everything these women have already handed to the authorities. You built the cage, we just changed the locks." She stood. "You always taught them the same rule, didn't you? A dead man owns nothing. Turns out it's true even for the man who sells the death." He was arrested that evening. 15 years of the architect's work did not survive contact with the one thing he'd never planned for. Not a detective, not a prosecutor, but a room full of the women he'd helped destroy, comparing notes. Once his own frozen structures forced him into the open, the file Nora had built, patient, airtight, did the rest. And the folder in the briefcase, the maps of all those ruined lives, turned him from a faceless advisor into the documented architect of dozens of frauds. The clients he'd taught began, one by one, to become the evidence against him, the way rot spreads once you finally open the wall. Diane got her reckoning. I watched her, in the days after, and it wasn't triumph on her face. It was something quieter and heavier, the particular exhaustion of a person who has finally set down a weight they'd carried so long they'd forgotten it wasn't part of them. 15 years, she said to me once. "I thought finding him would feel like winning. It feels like being allowed to finally put my arms down." She smiled, tired and real. "That's enough. That's plenty. As for me, I filed for divorce from a man I'd never actually met, since the man I married never existed. I kept the house he'd meant to leave me the ruins of. I went back to my job, to my kids at the school, to a life that was mine now in a way it had never been when I thought it was safe. Safe, I've learned, is not the same as free. I'll take free." The 5 of us had dinner, once, a few weeks after. Nora, Rachel, Grace, Vivian, and me, the school counselor who never did numbers. It should have been the strangest table in the world. 5 women whose only thread was the specific man-made wreckage each of us had crawled out of. Instead, it was the easiest room I'd ever been in. Nobody had to explain anything. Nobody had to shrink themselves or perform being fine. Grace made a dark joke about caskets and we all laughed too hard. The way you only laugh with people who've stood where you've stood. And somewhere in that dinner I understood what Diane had really built over 15 years. Not a law firm. A place to put your arms down. A room where the thing that broke you is the thing you have in common, and so it stops being the thing that's alone with you in the dark. That's the part they never see coming, these men. They isolate you so well, for so long, that they forget isolation can end. That the nobodies can find each other, that we can turn around. There's a last thing, and it isn't an ending, because Diane made very sure I understood it wasn't. A few weeks after, in her office, I asked her if it was finally over, if the architect was the end of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she gestured, the way she must have gestured 100 times, toward the waiting room outside her door. And I looked, and there were women sitting there. One reading, one staring calmly at nothing, one holding a folder to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright, at the beginning of her own worst year. He was one man, Diane said. A good one to catch. The best, maybe. But he sold his map to hundreds, and there are others like him, teaching what he taught, because there will always be men who look at the woman beside them and see a nobody to be erased. She squared the papers on her desk, and the steel came back into her voice, but it was a warmer steel now, a steel with a whole army behind it. But here's what's different now, Elena. Here's what took me 15 years to build. They're not erasing us one at a time in the dark anymore. Because we found each other. And we don't lose when we're together. She looked at me. You're one of us now. You'd be surprised how many of us there are. I think about that word all the time now, us. They tell you you're nobody. They tell you not to worry about the money. They tell you you're just the wife, just the face, just a phase, just a nobody who wouldn't understand. And one by one, quietly, we are finding each other. And we are learning to fight with paper. And we are teaching each other the oldest lesson there is, the one every single one of these men forgets. Never, ever underestimate the woman you decided was nothing, because she's the one who's going to be sitting at the kitchen table when you come home.